All right, thanks everyone for coming. Today we will talk about Federation Navy Comet in faction warfare PvP. I did this class, I think, in January, but since when I updated some data, talked with some people who use different feats of this ship in PvP quite extensively. So I updated some of the stuff, and I think it's worth doing this class again. For people who watch previous recordings especially, so that we have the up-to-date data. Okay, today we will talk about a couple of things. Firstly, about the ship profile, what are the bonuses, what are the general pros and cons of this ship, and why even bother to listen for an hour about one specific ship. When I will explain the most common feats and the variations as well as strengths and weaknesses. When I will briefly cover about some important considerations. Comet in general is quite an easy ship to use, so there won't be a lot of stuff to talk about, but still there are a couple of things that you need to know if you are going to use the Comet in PvP. When we will talk about the engagement map, what are the win rates of Comet in PvP against various ships when engaging solo. And we will wrap everything up with Q&A and some sources where you can get additional information if you need to. The entire class will take about an hour. I think it's a bit less, and you can ask your questions in Classroom Alpha chat in Discord. Okay, let's start with ship profile. Comet is the Galente Navy frigate with 3 high slots, 3 medium slots, and 4 low slots. And before I even go into the detail why I hold these classes about specific ships, because Comet is by far the most common ship in 1v1 in faction warfare. On the graph, you can see the number of 1v1 engagements in the last 1.5 years. That means 45,000 kills, either kills with a Comet or losses with a Comet. So the number of engagements, 1v1 engagements, where the Comet was involved in one way or the other. And as you can see, it's by far the most popular ship in faction warfare, and even if you are not going to use it, then you're definitely going to fight against it. And it's important to understand the feats, weaknesses, and strengths to get good results in PvP against this ship. The Comet has 2 racial bonuses, one 7.5% bonus for tracking speed per skill level. By skill level, I mean Galente frigate skill. And 20% bonus for hybrid damage, again, per Galente frigate skill level. The Comet has only 2 slots for guns, so the third high slot is the utility high. What are the general pros and cons? The main strength of a Comet is an excellent damage, tank, and speed. All 3 are exceptionally good. With blaster feats, Comet can go up to almost 400 DPS with Void. Although in reality it's a bit difficult to apply considering the tiny optimal range, but still, even with null, it's very competitive. Tank is very good because the majority of hit points is in structure or in hull, and this tank is available no matter what, so you can't newt him out, you can't hope that Comet somehow mismanages the tank, which is quite common on ships with small ancillary reps or medium ancillary shield boosters. Is just there, and you need to grind through all of the hit points to get a kill. And the base speed is also very high. It's not at the level of Minmatar frigates, but still it's very competitive. For example, if you compare Comet, Macro Warp Drive Comet, and the Slicer needs 2 nanos to outrun a Comet without anything. So you can kind of see that the base speed on this ship is very solid. Then Comet has a very simple damage application thanks to tracking speed. Even if you feed rails, which traditionally struggle with damage application, Comet will still apply very decently. And with blasters, on top of very high tracking speed on blasters, you get a huge tracking bonus, so it's almost impossible to out-track a blaster feed Comet. You can realistically only mitigate with range. And this ship is very easy to feed and very easy to control because it really doesn't have many tricky micromanagement modules, and that fitting in general is not very tight by frigate fit standards. So even with subpar fitting skills on your character, you generally can get a pretty optimized fits, which is quite often not possible on many other frigates. So what are the weaknesses? Well, the main weakness that we will go back to again and again is the lack of control. The 3 medium slots in Navy frigate PvP is not much. Usually Navy frigates have 4 or sometimes even 5 medium slots, and quite often Comet faces against double web opponents, which can control the engagement range. It doesn't mean that Comet is a disadvantage, but quite often if their opponents play it smart, they can leave the engagement if they need to. And because Comet is so popular, players are very experienced at fighting against a Comet, so they will generally play properly against any reasonable Comet fit. This is a bit of a disadvantage, for example, when you use some less popular fits, even less popular frigates, even like Navy Vigil. People will make some basic mistakes because they don't understand how this fit or frigate works. But against the Comet, people generally will understand very well how to fight against any popular Comet fit. And the final weakness, since you're lacking control, you have to commit generally. For example, many Minmatar frigates, they can look weaker on paper, but because they have much better control, they can be more opportunistic in engagements. And if it doesn't go their way, they can often just leave. But with a Comet, since you have only 3 medium slots for control, you often are committed, and it's up to your opponent to decide if he wants to leave or not. So in some cases, it's important to understand what fights you can take and what fights you cannot take, because you cannot leave them once you're committed. Okay, let's talk about the most popular fits. I will go from the most popular to the least popular. The most popular Comet is Afterburner Blaster Fit, and this is the fit that you will see probably 6 times out of 10 engagements. The fit is pretty standard. In the medium slots you have your standard combination for frigate PvP, Afterburner, Scrum and Web. The high slots are 2 largest neutron blasters, and the low slots are 2 tanking modules. Damage control is necessary because the majority of your tank is in structure. Then you have 2 DPS modules and small ancillary rep, which is kind of a supplementary tank because really you have nothing else that you can fit in the 4th slot that can be as efficient as the small ancillary rep. And rig slots are just full bulkheads. You don't really need another module for the DPS. So the DPS rig is not really optimal here because you already have double DPS modules in the low slots. So generally people just fit the full tank in the rig slots. You can use Tick 1 rigs, but the general consensus is that the cost of Tick 2 structure rigs is justified for performance. It will make the ship like 6 million more expensive, which is, I guess, acceptable for a Navy frigate. And Comet also has the drone bay for 2 flights of 3 drones each. Again, now let's talk about the strengths and weaknesses for this specific fit. The biggest strength and probably the biggest reason for popularity of this fit is that it's very good on paper. It's very easy to manage. As you can see, the tank is 7k HP. This is just raw hit points. Plus you get something out of ancillary rep. So in total it probably will be 8,000 effective hit points plus. And the vast majority of them is just available from the fit. You don't need to optimize your reps to get the actual hit points during the fight. The tank is amazing. As you can see, the tank and damage is amazing. The damage, as you can see, is almost 400 DPS. This is without anything. So if you throw a couple of cheap implants or drugs, you will go above 400 DPS. And it means this combination of tank, which is available in the hit points already, and DPS, it means that Comet will outbrawl pretty much any Navy frigate in the game. So it's very convenient to use. You can just click approach or keep it range, overheat stuff, and if your opponent doesn't do something fancy, he will probably lose. But this fit has a couple of weaknesses. It's very predictable. Because it's the most popular, people will by default assume that you will be running this fit. So for example, if you are fighting out of position, people will generally pull range from the button and avoid fighting at the optimal range of your guns. And if they are in a weaker brawler, then they will probably just will not give you a fight, because there is really nothing they can do. This feat really struggles from the lack of control because it's a close range frigate. You kinda need good control to keep the opponent in your engagement range, in your optimal range. And in fights against other Navy frigates is just not gonna be possible, because any other popular frigate will run double webs For example, hookbill is the first one that comes to mind. And against hookbill, this feat will have to fight at the scrum range. And at scrum range, these stats will not look as impressive because your DPS probably will hardly be like half of what you see on the screen. Because you will have to load null and then lose a little bit of DPS because of the range. And if you get tackled by any kiter, you are gonna die just by slow and very painful death, because this ship cannot do anything against just a pure kiter. The two sets of drones will not realistically do anything, and kiters generally can just kill them because they are not bonused for hit points. There are many tricks and variations that people use to kind of mitigate the weaknesses of this feat. Again, I will talk from probably the most popular to the least popular. The first and the most common trick of this feat is just to feed double webs. So take off the scrum and feed double webs. This completely mitigates the problem with control. So now Comet will actually have better control against the majority of scrum kiters that run two webs, thanks to good base speed. And this feat is extremely difficult to kill, because if you can't control the Comet, you just can't win DPS race. But of course, the problem is that you don't have tackle anymore. And generally, when you fight against the Comet, especially when you're out of position, you always have to remember about this trick. So for example, when you land on a Comet, the first thing you generally need to do, if this Comet sits at 0 and indicates that it's a blaster feat, you need to align out to a Celestial. Not just burn in the random direction, but to align out to a Celestial. And when the fight starts, you need to check how many webs you have on you. If it's a one web, then it's proceed as normal, and if it's two webs, then you just need to warp out, because you will not be able to pull range, and without pulling range, you're not gonna win a fight against Blaster Comet. The second trick is to feed overdrive again instead of one of the max taps. This is way more common for Rail Comet, but occasionally people do it on a Blaster Comet. The trade-off is pretty clear. You get more control because you have higher base speed due to an overdrive, but you lose quite a bit of DPS. On the other hand, thanks to an overdrive, you can also upgrade your web to a Tech 2, which will also give you a little bit more control. And you can also fit utility, although again, utility in this fit is quite rare, but it's possible. Generally, it's good to have a look at the speed of a Comet, especially once all control is applied, to see if it's a standard double max tab Comet or if it has some fancy modules in the low slots. The third trick is to fit utility. It's not really a trick, it's more like a trade-off. Newt is pretty rare on this fit because if you're fighting in the newt range, when you are gonna win anyway, so you don't really need a newt. It just won't make a difference by the time you already kill your opponent with DPS. And the newt makes this fit very cap unstable, because as you can see, it lasts for 1 minute 16, which is like 8 small ancillary cycles and then just a little bit more. But if you feed a newt, then it will be difficult to even get all the paste out of your ancillary rep. So newt is quite rare, but nos is possible, because one of the weakness of this feat is reliance on cap. So if you newt out the comet, it's actually pretty harmless. So Nosferatu kinda ensures you against the feats that run multiple newts. But again, in general, full newting feats in the current meta are quite rare. You will probably fight against multiple newt feats only against Tristan, which can be a full newts, and ships like Navy Heron, which has 2 utility highs and also can run double newts, and that's about it. And against a single newt, Comet is generally perfectly fine. Again, just because it has so much tank and DPS that if you're under one newt, you can simply cut down the usage of ancillary rep, and it's fine. You will survive until the end of the fight. Generally, you need multiple newts to newt out a comet before he kills you. The third trick is ECM drones. The reasoning is that if a comet is controlled really hard and just scrum kited, the free DPS drones are not gonna do anything anyways. So you can kinda use ECM drones to try to reset the control. This is quite common against Hookbill. If for some reason you decide to engage out of position against a Hookbill in a Blaster Comet, then probably just using ECM drone straight away is a better idea when trying to win a DPS race against a Hookbill at scrum range. Because Comet just not gonna win DPS race at scrum range against a Hookbill. So I think it's a good idea to keep ECM drones as one of the packs in your drone bay, just for these situations. But many people just take 2 DPS packs, which is fine as well. And the final very minor trick, you can feed Tech2 Web and downgrade something else to meta. Usually it's one of the max stops for compact max stop, and then you can feed Tech2 Web. Again, this is similar trade-off to an overdrive, but less dramatic. So you get a little bit more control, but a little bit less DPS. In overdrive, you get a lot more control, but a lot less DPS. But the idea is the same. So overall, people who use this feed, they have to do something about poor control. And the natural alternative is to feed micro warp drive instead of afterburner. The reasoning behind this feed, which was like a meta maybe half a year ago, now it's a bit less common, at least from my experience. The reasoning is, well, if I cannot really control many scrum kiting Navy frigates anyway, when I will just avoid them entirely, but use micro warp drive to be even stronger against everything else. With micro warp drive, you need to remember that Comet has an excellent base speed again, so even without any modules for speed or agility, it's still extremely fast. As you can see, 3.5 kilometers per second without anything. Again, if you add like implants, boosters, it will go up probably up to 4K, and it's without heat as well. So what you can do in this ship, it opens up several opportunities. So firstly, you can kill all kiters very easily, and kiters usually are happy to engage a comet because if it's an afterburner comet, then it's an easy kill. So you get some kills in this area. When you can usually engage out of position against most opponents, because most opponents will expect the typical afterburner blaster fit and they will not sit at 0. And if your opponent does not sit at 0, then you can just macro warp drive away. He's not gonna scrum you, even if it's like a hook bill or anything like that. So you can just check out what's going on inside the Plex. And if it's a favorable fight, then you can take the fight. And if it's not favorable, then you can just leave. And the same applies to third partying of someone else's 1v1. Again, you can just enter the Plex, check out what's going on, and then usually if it's unfavorable, you can just burn away and leave. There are several people who utilize this feat very, very effectively. It's actually a very annoying style to deal with, because they will just not engage in any fight that's not favorable to them. But as soon as you engage in 1v1 with someone, they will immediately appear, because we have so much mobility to close the distance and third party very easily. You can also dual prop it, so you just remove you remove a web and replace it with afterburner, and it's quite strong against any cruiser that's not tailored for killing small stuff. Because Comet has so much DPS that you actually can pressure tank even on a cruiser. And once you are at a tight orbit with afterburner, cruisers need to be fitted in a very specific way to deal with you. Otherwise, they're just not gonna apply anything with main guns. So we need to have either a newt or 2 webs or drones, and you can quite easily just not engage anything that has it, and get some pretty impressive kills against cruisers in a solo Comet. The weakness is mostly the same that I mentioned in the previous slide, but just even worse. So you cannot fight against scrum kiteers at all, even when you are in position, because your control is so weak when this feat is scrummed, that you just cannot win against ships like hookbills or many other scrum range Navy frigates with double web. So you just need to be smart and understand what fights you can take and what fights you cannot. And the fights you cannot, you need to just avoid entirely. The pretty popular alternative is the Rail Comet. The Rail Comet works reasonably well because of tracking bonus. The feat is again pretty much the same. You just replace blasters with railguns, and the rest is the same. The feat is much tighter, so you need to downgrade some of the modules to meta, but generally it works pretty similarly. One important note on this feat is that you need to have a newt. This is your security against ships that will try to break your tracking. Against Rail Comet, you actually can just orbit 500, and even with a big tracking bonus and a web, Comet will really struggle with application. And because the general control is pretty weak, Comet will not be able to improve transversal and burn away. So you need to have something as a Comet pilot to defend against this tactic. And this something is the newt. Otherwise, ships like Slashers, Dual Web, Kestrels, Atrons, and many other fast, even Tech 1 frigates, they will kill you if they play it smart. But with a newt, it's it's not gonna work because it just takes too long to kill a comet, and your newt will pressure the cap too much to make this tactic easily executable. So just remember that if you feed the rail a comet, you need to have a newt. You are not going to use it all the time because if you are scrum kiting, obviously you are not going to use the newt. The range is just too short, but you need to have it as a safety measure against frigates that will break your tracking. And for the same reason, not for the same reason, but you need to have tick to scrum because you will fight at the edge of scrum range, and every extra kilometer you can get from your tackling module is very important. So these are like two things that you cannot downgrade, but the rest you can kind of change around if you need. Let's talk about strengths and weaknesses. The biggest strength is that it's less predictable, and when you engage out of position, it's very helpful. People generally, when they decide to fight against the comet, they will expect the blaster feed. And if I expect blaster feed, they will not sit at 0, they will sit at like scrum range or even further away. And this is exactly what you need when you fly the rail comet. So many fights that would be quite unfavorable, they actually turn reasonably okay because people have to take into consideration the possibility that you will be blaster hit. And even when people fight out of position against the comet, they will still often just do automatic scrum kiting without even checking your guns, even though they can. And this ship again has very good combination of hit points and damage for a scrum kiter. So in many cases, when you are just fighting scrum kiter against scrum kiter, your tank and DPS are very respectable. And quite often, other ships, other scrum kiters, they need to think about something they need to do to mitigate it. They cannot just win the straight DPS race. So they kind of want to break your tracking, maybe pull away to reduce DPS a little bit or do something else. But they cannot just engage in straight DPS race. There are many problems, of course, as usual in EVE. The main trade-off is you are actually more efficient than a comet, than a blaster comet, only in a very tiny range. Anything below 6.5 kilometers and a blaster comet with null will actually deal more damage than the rail comet. This is even before any tracking issues applied. And with tracking issues, you probably need to go like 8 to 10 kilometers before you can be better than a blaster comet. And it's a very tiny range. And if you cannot reliably keep a fight within this range, you may just be better off by using a blaster comet. The second problem I mentioned in the beginning, this fit, even with tracking bonus, it will struggle a bit with tracking if your opponent manages to close the range down to like 2 kilometers or less. So for that reason, you need to have a newt to protect yourself against it. And this feat will just straight out die against any brawler when fighting out of position. But the saving grace for this feat is that many people will expect blasters and they will not engage at 0. And if they don't engage at 0, then you're actually okay. to fight against blasters, to fight against brawlers even out of position. But this is more down to the psychology and like normal reasoning. If you need to hope basically that your opponents are reasonable and they make like reasonable assumptions and not just fight at zero. There are two tricks that you need to know for this feat. The first trick is to downgrade to meta guns. It sounds like a big no-no in frigate PvP, but actually in this specific case it works perfectly fine because you don't need Tech 2 ammo for this ship realistically at all. And in meta 4 guns you will have the same, I believe, the same optimal range and just very slightly lower DPS. But meta guns free up a lot of fitting space. So you can trade this minor DPS drop and the lack of Tech 2 ammo, which you are not gonna use probably anyway, for upgrading other modules. So you can fit with meta guns 2 Tech 2 max tabs and I think not and but or Tech 2 damage control. So you can either get more tank or you can get similar DPS. And fitting overdrives instead of one of the max tabs is very common on this fit because it allows you to upgrade all the meta modules to Tech 2. So you not only get much better control with an overdrive, but you also get more tank and better newt and probably better web as well. So your gains are higher than in Blaster Fit when you trade one of the max tabs for an overdrive in this one. This trick is actually quite common in Rail Comets. You will see Rail Comets with overdrives quite often currently. The final one is the Kiting Comet. I'm personally not a big fan of this fit, and like in my last class on the Comet, I said that you shouldn't really use it. I talked with a couple of guys that use Kiting Comets quite regularly, and it's kind of changed my opinion. It's not really bad, it's not really great either, but it's usable. This is my current take on the Kiting Comet. The fit is quite a bit different compared to the other fits. You need, of course, the largest railguns, which is 150 mm in high slots, and medium slots, again, pretty natural. Micro warp drive warp disruptor, this is your control, and you need cap booster as well because the capacity is just not good enough on a Comet to kite with something else in your medium slot, like a tracking disruptor or anything like this. You just run out of cap. So you need a cap booster in your medium slots. The low slots are similar. Damage control is pretty much required because you need some hit points, and the majority of hit points on a Comet is in hull. You need at least one damage module, which is the max tab, and you need some sustainable tank. You are not gonna run ancillary rep all the time. This is the same case as in the Kiting Slicer, but you need something to repair some occasional damage, like drones or something like this. So you need some damage. You need some tanking module. The fourth and final low slot is kind of free. you can fit a tracking enhancer or you can fit a second max stop. I think we both are possible if you downgrade something to a meta module. The main trade-off is that with a tracking enhancer, you have more DPS at the point range at like 24 kilometers and beyond. And with double max stops, you have a bit more DPS close range, so 20 kilometers or less. So really depends on the specific fight. Difficult to predict which one is gonna be better in the specific case. Both are viable. The rig slots, I would say one of the rigs must be Locus to increase your optimal range. The other two are a bit of down to your personal preference. You can fit more damage. For example, drop one of the Locus rigs for a DPS rig. You can fit more speed. So trade one of the Locus rigs for second rig that will add agility or top speed. Or you can fit just triple Locust. This is the same as the slicer and get just maximum optimal range and effective DPS in the actual fights. It's down to your personal preferences. The strengths and weaknesses. Let's start with weaknesses actually, so I can explain why I don't really like this fit. The main weakness is poor tracking. It's quite similar to a beam slicer, as far as I remember, and it struggles to apply against afterburning frigates. So you will need to do some fancy micro, like transversal match, or like keep it range, basically minimize your transversal to apply damage properly. The second big problem is that the third of your damage is in drones, and the problem with split damage ships, split damage kiting ships, is that people, especially experienced people, they will just quickly kill your drones. And there is nothing you can do about it because your drones are not bonused for HP, for hit points, and they will just die before you can recall them. And once all of your drones are dead, your DPS is actually pretty, well, it's not bad, it's on par with like light missile kiters, I guess, but it's not that great either. This is the typical problem for many kiters that use drones as their secondary source of DPS. For example, light missile breacher has the same problem. Like when you look at the paper damage, it looks amazing for a light missile kiter, but when you just only have two drones, and once these two drones are gone, and like any experienced pilots against kiting breacher, they will just kill your drones first of all. The DPS just drops by like 30%, and the ship just starts looking quite a bit worse when it was with the drones. And you have no damage mitigation with Evor, which is quite common nowadays on many kiters. For example, Condors, Breachers, probe fleets, they will all run some kind of Evor to mitigate the damage. But in the case of Comet, it's not possible. So if your opponent has at least some projection to 20 kilometers, then you will take this damage consistently. It's not maybe as bad as the slicer, because slicer is just so paper thin tank that it really relies on complete mitigation, but it still can be a bit annoying. especially once you lose your drones, it will just take a lot of time to kill an opponent. But this feat has many strengths as well. Firstly, it's very unpredictable. People generally will not expect the kiting comet at all. And again, I want to refer back to the point of fighting out of position in a comet. People will always expect blaster comets. And when they expect blaster comets, they will not start the fight at zero. And when they don't start the fight at zero, you will be able to burn away from the button, even when you're out of position, which is a huge strength for this feat, compared, for example, to a slicer. Because slicer is always a kiting slicer. Well, almost always. And people expect kiting slicers, and they will meet kiting slicers at zero, even when they are scrum kiters or something like this. But against a comet, it doesn't work. People expect brawling comets. And it allows you to fight out of position quite comfortably and consistently, unlike in the slicer. The second strength is the cup. Because you can fit a cup booster in the medium slot, you don't really care about how long the fight is going to take, because you will have capacitor for the entire duration of a fight anyway. This is a problem for many kiters. Again, for slicer is always on a timer, because even when you do not repair anything on a slicer, you're still gonna run out of cap in something like 1.5 minutes. Just from shooting guns, running macro warp drive, and your point. So you kind of have to get a kill in these 1.5 minutes, or you need to start doing some very fancy things, like delaying tackle, turning off your macro warp drive, and so on. In this one, you don't really need to do anything. You can just top out your capacitor with cap booster. And damage, and especially tank, is quite respectable. The 5k HP plus ancillary rep is very good for a kiting ship. And your DPS, at least until you run out of drones, is also pretty respectable. 180 DPS is on par with a slicer, which is pretty much the highest DPS frigate in the game. But once you run out of drones, of course, you drop out to like 120. Yeah, I think we discussed all the tricks already, so I think we can move on to the next slides. Okay, important considerations. There is only one thing you need to remember when fighting in a comet. This is the mistake that I notice that people make all the time, and it's related to ammo selection for brawling feats. This graph shows the damage over distance for two comet feats. The red one is the scrum kiting comet with railguns and antimatter loaded. And the three other lines are for the blaster comet. The orange line is the blaster comet with void. The green line is blaster comet with antimatter, and the blue line is blaster comet with null. The main mistake that people make is that they do not switch from typically void to null when they are getting scrum kited. But the math is actually maybe quite surprising, but null is better than the close range ammo as early as 3 kilometers. So once you pass 3 kilometers, you're actually doing more DPS with null than with void or antimatter. And people stay on void or antimatter until their opponent is like at 8 kilometers, which is a very, very big mistake because we lose a ton of DPS compared to the correct ammo. So when you are fighting against a ship that is likely gonna scrum kite, especially if you're out of position, it may be a good idea to switch to null immediately because the optimal for null will come just so quickly that you are just better off starting off with a proper ammo than wasting 5 seconds on reloading. And another point I want to make here is the crossover between the Rail Comet and the Blaster Comet. The Blaster Comet, as you can see, deals more damage uh, when you are closer than 6.5 kilometers, which is again quite a significant number. Many people think that Rail Comet is better as soon as like 4 or 5 kilometers, but it's actually not the case. Rail Comet is consistently better beyond 7 kilometers only, and below that you're just better off with a Blaster Comet with null. It's also important to remember that antimatter is quite helpful against ships that try to break tracking. It's quite rarely needed compared to void, but against some frigates that use tracking disruptor and orbit close, like a slasher for example, you probably will be better off with antimatter. So you should keep it in your cargo anyways, even though it's not a very commonly needed. And I think it's pretty much it for the fittings and stuff. Let's quickly talk about the engagement map in the end of this class. These graphs will show the number of 1v1 fights and the average win rate excluding mirrors. For first for ships that can enter scout complexes and then for ships that can enter small complexes. The data is for the last 1.5 years in faction warfare systems only. When we talk about scout complexes, Comet is one of the strongest frigates. You can engage pretty much everything except some very specific situations. For example, of course, you do not want to fight kiters when you're out of position in an afterburner brawling feat. You generally do not want to fight scrum kiters again out of position if you are in a macro warp drive feat, and so on. You need to be careful against like a Newton 3 stance because they can newt you out before you can kill them, or Heron navies. But generally, apart from these exceptions that you will learn with experience, it's a fair game against everything, pretty much. The Comet is, in terms of win rates, it's one of the strongest frigates in scout complexes. Only Navy Vigil can match it, but Navy Vigil is a very weird frigate that requires a lot of skill points on your character because you will have to use drones, rockets, and ideally some guns to maximize DPS. And it's a web kiting frigate, which also requires a bit of understanding what you can and cannot engage. The Comet is significantly more straightforward, and as you can see, it's also much more popular than Navy Vigil. As for the small complexes, Again, you can fight all the Navy frigates, and usually all of Tech 1 destroyers. You should only avoid Navy destroyers. Navy destroyers in small complexes are really in their own league. They are very strong, and Comet will typically struggle a lot against them. But against Tech 1 frigates or Tech 1 destroyers, it's fine. Again, just keep in mind some really weird stuff, like full Newton dragoons, very rare, but you need to remember about this opportunity. Things like dual web coercers or dual web thrashers that will kill you, and maybe like kiting or overprop algases in position. But again, these are quite rare, I think, nowadays. So generally, everything below Navy destroyer, I think, is a fair game for Comet in the small complexes. I don't list here advanced frigates, so the assault frigates, pirate frigates, pirate destroyers. I think these are rare enough to not really worry about them. One thing you need to remember when fighting against Tech 1 ships is that you definitely need to avoid everything that has racial resists against kinetic and thermal. That is all Galenta Tech 1, Tech 2 frigates, and all Caldari Tech 2 frigates. The rest are engageable, I would say. Although it's not going to be too easy. For further info, you can go to eFrigates Patreon or eFrigates YouTube. They have recordings of his classes. If you are new to faction warfare PvP in general, then I recommend looking at the class that I recorded in May about the basics of solo PvP in faction warfare. It explains in details all the game mechanics and all the theoretical stuff that you need to know to understand the engagements better. The YouTube only has the recording, but Patreon has both the recording and the slides. So if you don't want to watch like an hour long video, you can just skim through the slides. And I think that's everything I wanted to say. If you have any questions, please ask them in the Classroom Alpha channel on Discord. I will give it like a minute or two while I look for the class feedback link. Okay, I posted the class feedback link. Please leave your feedback. I update these classes quite regularly, so if you uh, want me to cover something in addition to what I said, or if you need kind of additional clarifications, information, or anything like this, then please leave your feedback, and for the future classes I will take it into consideration. And if there are no questions, we are exactly on time, exactly 1 hour. So thank you for watching. I will post the recording in Pinks, I think. And see you in the next classes. Thank you again. Bye bye.